Avoidants don't care what you do for them. They value one thing only: size. Imagine giving someone a gift wrapped in gold, crafted with months of personal sacrifice, only to watch them flinch as if you've handed them a live grenade. If you have ever loved, worked with, or tried to reach someone with an avoidant attachment style, you know this gut-wrenching experience. You pour in effort. You clean the house, you buy the perfect gifts, you plan grand gestures, you try to anticipate their every need, and you offer endless reassurances of your love. You do everything right according to every traditional playbook of romance and devotion. And yet, the more you do, the further they pull away. Frustrated, it leaves you feeling exhausted, confused, and fundamentally invisible. You ask yourself, why don't they care what I do for them? Am I not doing enough? Do I need to try harder? Here is the unsettling truth. You are doing too much. And worse, you are speaking a language their brain is wired to reject. You see, we have been conditioned to believe that love is measured by output, by how much service, effort, and sacrifice we display. But the avoidant mind does not operate on the economics of appreciation. To an avoidant, your grand sacrifices do not feel like love. They feel like an unpaid invoice. Every act of service you perform creates an unspoken expectation of emotional reciprocity that their nervous system interprets as a trap. If you leave this room today believing that doing more will fix your relationship, you will continue to run on a hamster wheel of exhaustion until you burn out entirely. You will keep triggering the very distance you are trying so desperately to close. In this talk, we are going to look beneath the surface of the human brain. We are going to explore the neurobiology of the avoidant mind, how their emotional threat detection system works, why your best intentions backfire, and the precise emotional frequency you must adopt if you want to reach them. Because avoidants do value something. They value one very specific, non-negotiable psychological state. It isn't your grand gestures, it isn't your words, and it isn't your self-sacrifice. Once you understand what this one thing is, and how to cultivate it using your own emotional intelligence, the entire dynamic shifts. The running stops, the wall drops. If you want to stop chasing someone who keeps running, stay with me for the next 20 minutes. What we are about to unpack will completely transform how you understand human connection. Why performing heroic acts of devotion, buying gifts, or bending over backward fails to earn the trust of an avoidant and often actively pushes them away. How the avoidant brain perceives overt emotional demands and grand gestures not as love, but as an existential threat to their autonomy. The single thing avoidants actually value above all else: unconditional emotional safety, coupled with radical respect for their space. Practical strategies for shifting your self-regulation so you stop triggering their deactivating strategies and allow natural connection to breathe. How changing your approach creates a calm, high emotional intelligence environment where an avoidant feels safe enough to step toward intimacy on their own terms. When you love someone, your natural instinct is to give. You bring them coffee in the morning, you organize their schedule, you plan thoughtful weekend getaways, and you bend over backward to make their life easier. In almost every standard relationship model, this display of devotion acts as a bridge. It tells the other person, I see you, I care for you, and you can rely on me. But when you direct this intense effort towards someone with an avoidant attachment style, a strange and deeply painful paradox occurs. Instead of softening, they grow rigid. Instead of coming closer, they pull back. Instead of gratitude, you are met with a cold, uncomfortable tension that leaves you feeling utterly baffled and emotionally bankrupt. This phenomenon is what we might call the grand illusion of effort, the false belief that you can earn an avoidant's trust and affection through sheer force of goodwill and sacrifice. To break free from this painful loop, we must examine the fundamental disconnect between what you think you are offering and what the avoidant nervous system is actually receiving. When you perform heroic acts of devotion, your internal motivation is rooted in a desire for connection. You believe that by showing your high value and deep commitment, you are making it safe for them to open up. However, the avoidant mind does not perceive effort through the lens of generosity. It perceives it through the lens of emotional transaction. To a person whose attachment system is wired for hyper-independence, every unrequested favor, every grand gesture, and every self-sacrificing act feels less like a gift and more like an emotional contract they never signed. Their subconscious threat detection system immediately begins calculating the hidden cost. They think, if they are doing all of this for me, what am I expected to give in return? How much of my time, my energy, and my personal freedom will be demanded to pay back this emotional debt? To an avoidant, heavy devotion registers as an impending loss of autonomy. They do not see your hard work as a reflection of your love. They see it as a covert strategy to draw them into an overwhelming web of intimacy that they feel completely unequipped to manage. The harder you work to prove your worth, the heavier the emotional atmosphere becomes, triggering their automatic instinct to deactivate, retreat, and protect their personal boundaries at all costs. This dynamic creates a tragic misunderstanding. You interpret their withdrawal as a sign that you haven't done enough, so you double down, you work harder, sacrifice more, and push further into their space to get a positive reaction. Meanwhile, they interpret your escalating effort as an intensifying invasion, causing them to pull away even faster. The cycle persists because you are trying to solve an emotional security issue with external performance. You are operating under the illusion that affection is something to be earned through labor, when in reality, the avoidant individual is not looking for a heroic provider or a self-sacrificing martyr. They are quietly searching for an environment where they do not feel managed, indebted, or controlled. Until you recognize that your relentless effort is actually feeding the very fire of their distance, you will continue to burn your energy on a strategy that actively pushes away the very closeness you are trying so desperately to build. To truly understand why an avoidant individual retreats in the face of grand emotional gestures, we have to look past conscious intent and peer directly into the neurobiology of fear. At the center of this dynamic sits the amygdala, the brain's primary threat detection center, responsible for evaluating our environment and deciding whether we are safe or in danger. In a securely attached individual, warm expressions of love, deep emotional conversations, and overt demands for intimacy signal connection and safety. The brain releases oxytocin and dopamine, creating a sense of calm and biological reward. However, for someone who carries an avoidant attachment template, those exact same emotional inputs trigger a wildly different neurological reaction. Their amygdala does not register overt intimacy as a sanctuary, it flags it as an existential threat to their survival, setting off alarms that demand immediate escape or self-preservation. This neurological wiring is rarely an accident. It is a legacy of past conditioning where emotional closeness was linked to overwhelm, control, or the loss of personal identity. Early in life, the avoidant learned that relying on others led to disappointment, intrusion, or an unbearable pressure to perform. As a result, their brain adapted by developing a hypervigilant defense mechanism. When you approach an avoidant with deep emotional vulnerability, high-energy affection, or direct calls for emotional reciprocity, their amygdala bypasses rational logic entirely. It evaluates the intensity of your presence not as love, but as an impending invasion. The biological threat is not physical harm. It is the perceived threat of engulfment, the terrifying sensation that their personal boundaries are being eroded and their precious autonomy is about to be completely consumed by your needs. When this neurochemical alarm trips, the avoidant brain instinctively activates what attachment theorists call deactivating strategies. These are self-protective mechanisms designed to rapidly reduce emotional temperature and restore distance. Their heart rate spikes, their biological defense systems flare, and their mind immediately begins searching for ways to shut down the connection. They become stone-faced, intellectually detached, dismissive, or physically absent. To the person standing on the receiving end, this sudden coldness feels cruel, calculated, or completely unprovoked. But from a biological standpoint, the avoidant is simply attempting to downregulate a nervous system that feels actively under siege. They are not rejecting you as a human being. Their brain is frantically pulling the emergency brake on a situation that feels emotionally suffocating. This biological reality creates a fundamental trap for anyone who attempts to force connection through emotional intensity. When you sense their retreat and respond by pursuing them harder, asking them what is wrong, demanding that they talk, or pouring out even more emotion, you are essentially firing flares directly into their brain's threat radar. You are confirming their amygdala's worst fears, that closeness requires constant emotional labor, and that their space is never truly safe from intrusion. Understanding this neural reality requires a fundamental paradigm shift. You must realize that an avoidance shutdown is not a logical choice, but an involuntary stress response to feeling overwhelmed. Until the environmental threat level drops, until the implicit pressure for emotional performance is completely removed, their brain physically cannot risk coming out of hiding. Once we strip away the grand gestures, the intense emotional displays, and the persistent efforts to earn affection, we arrive at the absolute core of the avoidant psyche. If avoidants do not care about what you do for them, what is the underlying currency that actually opens their heart? The answer lies in a single non-negotiable psychological state: absolute psychological safety paired with radical respect for their autonomy. This is the ultimate value for an avoidant, the single condition under which their defensive walls can begin to soften. While an anxious or secure individual might measure the health of a relationship through frequency of contact, verbal reassurance, or shared emotional experiences, an avoidant measures connection by the degree of freedom they retain while standing right beside you. To fully grasp this core currency, one must understand what autonomy means to the avoidant mind. Autonomy is not merely a preference for being alone or a desire to avoid responsibilities. It is their primary coping strategy for managing existential anxiety. To an avoidant, self-reliance is the fortress that keeps chaos at bay. The moment they feel that a relationship requires them to abandon their self-sovereignty, surrender their schedule, or continuously report their internal emotional state to satisfy a partner's anxiety, the relationship transforms from a source of comfort into a site of captivity. Therefore, true emotional safety for an avoidant is not created by telling them how much you love them. It is created by proving through your consistent calm behavior that your love does not carry a hidden tax on their independence. This form of psychological safety requires a sophisticated environment where space is granted freely, without guilt, anger, or passive-aggressive punishment. When an avoidant steps back to process their internal world, a high emotional intelligence partner does not treat that retreat as a personal insult or a crisis that must be solved immediately. Instead, they offer a low-threat presence, a state of being where you remain emotionally grounded, warm, and available, but completely unpressured. You create an atmosphere where their need for space is normalized rather than pathologized. When an avoidant realizes that they can pull back to regulate themselves without returning to a partner who is resentful, demanding, or deeply distressed, a profound shift occurs in their perception of the relationship. In this sanctuary of non-demanding presence, the avoidant begins to experience a reality they rarely thought possible: intimacy without engulfment. They discover that being close to you does not mean losing themselves. By respecting their boundaries without abandoning your own emotional stability, you offer them the exact psychological condition their nervous system craves. They no longer have to waste energy constantly defending their borders against perceived intrusion. Paradoxically, it is only when the demand for closeness is completely removed that an avoidant feels safe enough to drop their guard, let down their internal drawbridge, and actively choose to step forward into genuine, authentic connection. Navigating a relationship with an avoidant partner requires moving away from reactive emotional habits and mastering the precise mechanics of a low-threat presence. When an avoidant person senses an impending loss of autonomy, their brain automatically deploys deactivating strategies, mental and behavioral maneuvers designed to suppress attachment needs, downregulate emotion, and create immediate distance. These strategies manifest as sudden emotional coldness, hyper-focusing on a partner's minor flaws, nitpicking, or physically withdrawing into work and solitary hobbies. The natural reaction for most partners is to meet this distance with heightened anxious pursuit, demanding answers or trying to coax them back into the light. However, disrupting this destructive dance requires you to deliberately alter your own self-regulation, altering the emotional climate so their deactivating defenses no longer have a target to react against. At the heart of low-threat presence is the ability to manage your own internal nervous system without forcing your partner to manage it for you. When your partner pulls back, your personal alarm bells might ring, signaling rejection or abandonment. Low-threat presence means recognizing that spike of anxiety within yourself and actively self-soothing. Instead of leaning into their space to get reassurance, which immediately triggers their amygdala's threat response, you anchor yourself in emotional stability. You maintain your warmth and baseline affection, but you strip away all implicit demands for emotional performance. You refrain from asking probing questions like, "Why are you being so distant?" or making guilt-inducing statements about their withdrawal. You remain grounded in your own life, hobbies, and emotional well-being, demonstrating that your stability is not fragilely dependent on their moment-to-moment emotional availability. This subtle shift fundamentally changes the interpersonal dynamic because it disarms their primary defense system. Avoidant deactivating strategies rely heavily on an external catalyst. They are designed to push away an intrusive or demanding force. When you embody a calm, self-contained presence, you remove the pressure that fuels their retreat. You essentially remove the friction from the room. There is no pursuer to run from, no demand to defend against, and no unpaid emotional invoice hanging in the air. By offering a warm, open door without actively pulling them through it, you create a neutral ground. The avoidant individual no longer has to expend massive amounts of psychic energy defending their boundaries, which allows their nervous system to naturally drop out of fight or flight mode and settle into a state of quiet equilibrium. Practicing low-threat presence is not about becoming passive, indifferent, or playing mind games. It is an act of high-level emotional intelligence and disciplined self-containment. It means communicating clearly that you respect their pace and honor their need for internal processing while maintaining healthy boundaries of your own. When you stop chasing, you allow the natural emotional vacuum to form. In the absence of pressure, the avoidance mind is given the rare opportunity to actually miss you, to recognize their own organic desire for connection, and to experience intimacy as a voluntary choice rather than a mandatory obligation. Transforming a fragile, distant relationship into a securely attached partnership requires constructing a reliable psychological bridge built entirely on the foundation of high emotional intelligence. When you systematically stop triggering an avoidant's internal alarm systems, you stop reinforcing their core narrative, the belief that intimacy inevitably leads to a loss of personal freedom, constant criticism, or emotional exhaustion. By replacing anxious demands and covert expectations with a calm, self-regulated, and predictable environment, you offer them an experience that fundamentally challenges their attachment template. This shift does not happen overnight, nor does it occur through dramatic, single conversations. It is constructed through the quiet, consistent demonstration that your presence is a safe harbor rather than an unpredictable storm. The journey toward secure attachment begins when you cultivate deep emotional self-awareness within yourself, learning to recognize when your own attachment anxieties are taking the driver's seat. When an avoidant withdraws, an unregulated response creates an immediate clash of nervous systems. Your panic meets their defense, forcing both of you into survival mode. Conversely, when you apply emotional intelligence, you observe their pullback with compassionate neutrality. You recognize that their distance is an internal regulation strategy, not a declaration of war. By remaining steady, clear, and warm, without collapsing into despair or boiling over into resentment, you create an unprecedented dynamic of high emotional maturity. You show them that two people can be emotionally connected while remaining completely distinct, self-governing individuals. In this high EQ climate, the avoidant begins to internalize a profound new reality. Closeness does not require them to surrender their identity or manage your emotional state. As their nervous system repeatedly experiences safety instead of pressure, their reliance on automatic deactivating strategies slowly begins to fade. The internal drawbridge, kept permanently raised against perceived invasion, can finally be lowered. They no longer need to spend vast amounts of cognitive and emotional energy constantly guarding their borders. For perhaps the first time in their lives, the act of stepping toward another person feels like an authentic choice driven by genuine desire, rather than a forced obligation designed to appease an anxious partner. Ultimately, serving as a bridge to secure attachment is not about fixing, changing, or manipulating the avoidant individual into becoming someone else. It is about holding a steady, high-frequency space of emotional stability that invites them into a healthier way of relating. As you maintain your own boundaries, honor their need for space, and offer low-threat warmth, you rewrite the rules of engagement. You provide the exact conditions under which an avoidant's intrinsic desire for human connection can safely emerge. Freed from the fear of engulfment, they are finally given the psychological room to discover that intimacy, when rooted in mutual respect and radical autonomy, is not a trap to be feared, but a sanctuary where they can truly belong.